So my name is Kat Koppett. I'm here with my colleagues, Chris Esparza and Livia Walker. And today we are going to dive into facilitator excellence. It's the first of 4 sessions on the topic. This one is an overview, and then we'll dive into 3 specific intensive topics under that umbrella over the next month or so, few weeks. That is just about all the talking I want to do before we hear from you, because specifically this group of people I know is, I make up in my head that all of you have deep expertise and experience with facilitation already, even if there's someone in the room, since I don't know all of you, who feels like you are a beginner to the profession. I know that in your life, you have experience, having been facilitated, probably facilitating informally. And I know there are lots of expert professional facilitators here as well. So we are not going to yap at you very long here indeed, before we send you off to talk to each other and to reflect for yourself on facilitation. Here's what we would like you to do. We are going to ask you to reflect on a specific instance in which you experienced facilitation excellence, in which you feel like you experienced a moment of great facilitation in any context. So it could be a learning and development context. It could be a family event. It could be a meeting of some kind. Great facilitation. And what we'd like you to do is the following. We're going to put you into some small groups, and we want you to think about 3 things. And I will model opening some slides while I talk to you in a very elegant way, maybe, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just do it awkwardly and model telling you how I can talk about what I'm doing while I'm doing it as a facilitation technique to equalize status in the room. Or maybe I'll just talk and Livia will find the slides.
Happy to do that.
All right, so here's what I would like you to do. You're going to think about this facilitation moment that you experienced that was great. And I want you to answer 3 questions. What did the facilitator do? Try to be really specific as much as you can remember. What did they actually do or say in that moment? What were the behaviors that made it excellent? The more specific you can be, the better. Maybe you can remember, maybe you can't, but even if you can remember 1 word or 1 gesture or 1 movement, that's great. Secondly, what was the impact on you and the others in the moment? What do you remember feeling? What do you remember doing? What did you see or notice in the people around you in that moment? And then what were the longer term effects of that action by that facilitator, that facilitation? I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes, introduce yourself very briefly, and then share your experience. What did the facilitator do? What was the impact of you and others in the moment? And what were the longer term effects of that? Once you've done that, you'll have about 2 or 3 minutes each to share that. And then you'll have a 1 minute. I'm going to ask you to pick someone to summarize sort of the themes that you noticed about excellent facilitation. And I'll ask each group to have sort of a 1 minute summary presentation of what you discussed. What questions do you have about what I'm asking you to do? I'm going to take that silence as clarity on what I'm asking you to do, and we will put you into groups. You'll have about 10 minutes in your group. Hello, Ken. Hello, Carrie. How did that go in your group?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Did Jesse have some troubles with his audio still?
Yeah, he had to log off and it was gonna log back in, so.
We saw him disappear. That's too bad. All right. So welcome back, everyone. We would love to hear about your conversations. So how about group number 1, which is Carrie and Ken and Jesse somewhere out there in the universe. We hope he will return to us. What were some themes you noticed? What did you discover having those conversations about facilitation?
Should I go first?
Yeah, do you want to share and then I can fill in any gaps maybe?
Okay. I think I'm trying to see similarities between what okay, I'll just say what I said and then Carrie can jump in and we can draw some correlation of that. I thought one of the really interesting facilitations I sort of experienced was had to do with very little actual content delivery, but actually facilitating, really hands-on practical sessions, which sort of got you to delve into the context and off the back of that make you clearly see what was being taught or what was being learned just by your own actions, and you almost sort of let to see by doing sort of your performance gaps and your flaws almost very brilliantly. And in terms of the immediate impact, I clearly got to see, okay, this is one clear area which I never really realized that I needed to develop. And all of this was in a leadership retreat, which I was involved back during my master's in 2015. And when we talk about longer term effect or impact, it was, I kind of consider that one of career defining moments, that sort of shaped me, because it all of a sudden created a really strong awareness, where I was and what I wanted to be, and then helped me to make, the necessary improvements, which I guess has helped me for many years. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ken. Any other themes or general principles that you all noticed in that group? What a beautiful, powerful story that Ken had. Anything from your group that you want to add? Carrie, Jesse, for as long as you could be there. I'm glad you're back.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Hallelujah.
So thank you to Ken and Carrie for being patient with me as I typed things in. A really reflective group. And I just quickly added, because I was typing into chat, but I'm a Tyagi disciple. I had the opportunity to meet him in India and have been working with him and Matt for a long time, which is what brought me here. But through that process, one of the big things I've learned through facilitation is we're fighting for people's attention. There's so many distractions all the time, be it people at home or having dinner, or as Sophie, it happens, or it's work, or it's, the microphone not working, or it's just, this isn't really applicable. So one of the things that I always advocate for is how we're going to hold and maintain people's attention. And the one thing I still see organizations doing is death by PowerPoint. I don't know when we're going to learn. I don't know how often we have to advocate for it, but people don't pay attention to boring things. So let's not be boring. That's it.
That's great. Carrie, anything that you wanted to add or any themes you noticed in your group?
Let's see, I don't think so. I think our examples were all very different, so lots of good directions to go in. I think I talked about just a little bit about when someone has a really strong dissenting opinion, and sort of the example I saw was they asked, like, okay, well, like, how do others feel about this? Or, kind of getting sort of the wisdom from the room as opposed to, correcting that assumption as the facilitator. So I thought that was a very sort of powerful thing that stuck with me. And it's something I try to remember when I'm with groups and delivering content, that a lot of times the wisdom is in the room.
Beautiful, beautiful. Fantastic. All right, let's hear from our other group. Sophie, Claudine. Not Sophie, you were at dinner. I am not paying attention. Harijanto, Claudine, is it Gamze? Am I saying
Yes,
your name
yeah.
right?
Yes, it's correct. Actually, first of all, we realized that for a long time we didn't join any session, and we actually acting a facilitator. And because of that, we just try to remember what felt before. And then it's a common thing is we talk about it when the facilitator gave a space for each of participants. Actually, the impact is getting increased as we felt that, and also the role plays, the different activities, and when you changing the every kind of exercise, your role, your task, and also its impact also increasing. And making a correlation between what you are learning at the beginning and the end of the sessions, creating a correlation with your daily life and with your learnings, it's really creating a longer term effects in the trainings, as we can say, and sharing the facilitator experience. Actually, when they are sharing their own experience, also it's makes more creating more impact.
Beautiful.
Talk about it.
Beautiful. So much in there. So the facilitator sharing themselves, helping to make links to how it applies to their life, leaving space for the learners, right? Letting them have space, bringing in every voice. Lots of things in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. Claudine, Harijanto, anything you would add?
Go, Harry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. No. So from my side, Kat, I was just sharing with the rest of them too that perhaps the most memorable one was way back. I attended this in 2016, and it's still, it still stuck with me, because what the facilitator did was, in a 3-day workshop, we had multiple role plays. And during the role plays, as we progress, then there will be like coaching as part of the feedback session. And it was quite easy for me to grasp and really relate to, because it's exactly what you were doing in that moment that is being used as an example. And already, the person was already telling me how to do it differently, and then I would practice it in a different way based on what he has mentioned. So that really kind of was effective for me.
Beautiful. Feedback and coaching in the moment, learning by doing. Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Excellent. Good. Thank you for coming off mute. Extra work for you. Great. Harry, how about for you?
I think I don't have anything to add. I think Gamze and Claudine have done a good job of summarizing our discussion.
Fabulous.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, so as predicted, you all have a rich knowledge, both experientially as participants, about what makes great facilitation. What we are hoping to do today is make conscious some of the things that we know and hopefully are already doing unconsciously, and provide a framework to check ourselves so that we can strengthen our mindsets and muscles around facilitation, and so that we can expand our range of options in any given moment and extend the environments within which we can use these skills. So we've developed a framework that we hope will take all of the skills and mindsets of great facilitation and aggregate them for us. What we have not yet done is define facilitation. And some of you may know this story. When I first was teaching, the first time I ever presented at a conference, it was on storytelling as a training tool at NASAGA conference back in 1999. And I got about halfway through the session, and this guy was at the back of the room, and about 45 minutes in, he raised his hand. I was halfway through doing all these exciting things on storytelling, facilitating an amazing session, interactive, everything you just mentioned. He raised his hand and said, "Excuse me, can you define what you mean by story?" And that was Matt Richter. And I sheepishly, turned to the group, and we co-created a definition of story, and it was fine. But then I went on, a decade-long journey to define story. We are not going to co-create a definition of facilitation. I'm not going to go on a 10-year journey to define facilitation. I've already done that. I'm just going to say that if you go to the International Association of Facilitators, they do not have a published version, a published definition of facilitation. And we are not going to give you one, because it is defined in many, many ways. What I will say is that we have an especially broad use of the term. And here is what it is. Facilitation makes the event, makes the interaction go more smoothly. Any situation you are in, any conversation, any interaction where you are the person, or you are using your skills to ease or smooth the conversation, the interaction, to make things easier, facile, to make things smoother and more aligned with your your objective, your goal, you are facilitating the interaction. So in this context, my guess is we're talking about learning and development contexts. Sometimes we're teaching facilitation skills to consultants or salespeople where their goal is different from explicitly learning and development. Sometimes we're talking to leaders where they're running meetings that are not explicitly learning and development contexts. Sometimes we're talking to parents. Any situation in which human beings are interacting, you can use facilitation skills to have things go more smoothly and be more effective. It doesn't exist. That's interesting, Sophie. That is interesting. So I'm going to share today this framework with you. And then, as I say, in subsequent sessions, we're going to do some deep diving into a couple of the skills, a few of those skills. Before I go any further, just type for me, if you would, into the chat, your specific context that you are here to learn more about applying facilitation skills. And then we can speak to those contexts as we go along. So if it's training, we can speak explicitly to training. If it's more facilitating meetings or client consultation kinds of situations, we can do that. So just let us know that now. You can also come off mute and just tell us. But training and meeting support for leaders, facilitation, training, consultation. So that's our assumption. Great. Okay. Yes, and train the trainers. Fantastic. Beautiful. All right. What's lovely about the context of facilitating training, and especially train the trainer, is it can get very meta, which we love, right? So you can, when we go through this framework today, especially for train the trainer, what's lovely about it is it becomes the content that you're teaching as well as the how. It becomes the what as well as the how. So let's show that to you now. All right. And here's the other thing that I will say about this. We are going to give you, I'll put it in the chat right now. It will also be attached on the Circle interface. An entire packet that will have one-sheets on each of these, we call them contributions, facilitator contributions, that will have lots of information on this. So do not feel like you have to take notes on this. I'm going to give it to you. You can follow along if you want, or you can just put it aside and listen to the conversation, which is actually what I suggest. But know that there's a lot of information there for you to have as we have this conversation. So here's the framework. The first thing to notice about it is that there are 3 colors, 3 different types of contributions. This is a little bit of a force. In fact, all of the contributions have mindset pieces, knowledge pieces, and skill pieces or process pieces, content pieces, and mindset pieces to them, but they fall into these 3 buckets mostly. So the first bucket is the mindset buckets. So the mindset buckets, there are internal mindsets, ways that you are thinking about yourself inside your values, and then external things. So what are my values and my beliefs, and how do I show those? And then what are the ways that I'm managing myself in terms of how I interact with other people? So my values and my beliefs, do I know what they are? And are my behaviors aligned with those? And then what are the thoughts in my head? And how do I interact with them? So let me say that a little more clearly. Modeling my values are, do I know what my values are? Do I know what my beliefs are? And am I showing up with those, modeling those values and beliefs? So for example, if I believe that the wisdom is in the room, am I seeking the wisdom from the room? And am I letting the participants in the room speak up, access their own experiences? Or am I just lecturing at them the whole time and saying, oh, you know this, you have experience, and let me tell you what your experience of facilitation is? Managing yourself is everything from knowing that bias exists and managing bias, to recognizing your triggers and figuring out how to manage your triggers, and learning emotional intelligence, which are big, deep, wide things, to managing self-talk. So if I start the session and I don't have my slides ready, and the little voice in my head is saying, this is terrible, I'm doing a session on facilitation skills, and I look like a terrible facilitator, and everybody's going to lose faith in me, and I should just quit now, I can manage that voice, shift it, recalibrate it, and come back so that I don't decompensate into a blubbering mess who can't help my participants. Those are the mindsets. The second bucket is content. There are 2 contributions under content. One is subject matter, which is the actual content of the course, in this case, the framework, and the context. The same content for different folks needs to be presented differently. Clearly, when I'm presenting this to you, it's different from if I'm presenting it to senior consultants in a finance firm who know much less about this. This might be completely new to them. To you, it's clearly not. Or if I'm presenting to 6th graders in a middle school. Full stop. The most important thing to remember about the content bucket, and Ken has already spoken to us about this, is it's the thing that we tend to, if we're not careful, spend the most time thinking about, and it's often the least important. Great facilitation is knowing that the content in some ways is the least important part. Tyagi is the master of this, isn't he? Yeah. All of the other contributions are process contributions to that end, right? So the content is 1/6 of the framework. All the rest are the how. And they are establishing presence, which is simply being able to establish credibility in how you're standing and speaking, maintaining focus, keeping people's attention. As we were talking about before, as Jesse was telling us, that's not just about having great activities. It's simply about being able to have people want to see and hear you and listen to you. Again, Tyagi is the master of that, right? He was a street busker, a street magician. He knew how to get people to stop and pay attention to him and be entertained. But it's more than that. It's also about being able to give and take focus. It's also being able to understand and notice and surf status dynamics. So when do I want to take the status in the room so people will pay attention and listen to me? When do I want to cede status and give status to the participants in the room so that they feel respected and they will be confident to take the baton if I'm giving it to them and share their wisdom? Tiago is also a master of that. It's very interesting to watch who he will give status to, how he manages status. Spoiler alert, it's often not the highest, the person with the high authority in the room that Tyagi wants to give status to. He'll often play with that. So establish presence. Engage through story. Story is meaning. As Jerome Bruner, the cognitive psychologist, said, there are 3 levels of story that we talk about here. Just like with facilitation, we define story very broadly. I now have a definition, partly because I've spent a lot of years working on it, also because my daughter wrote a film, created a 2-year project, which was a film defining story, and many of our colleagues helped her with that. So I have a very good definition of story now. We look at it in 3 levels. One is the anecdote level, which is usually what people think about with story. I'll tell you an interesting little anecdote to help you remember something or understand something or hook you emotionally. But then there's also the level of understanding, if story is meaning, then my whole presentation, my whole learning session can be thought of as a story with a beginning, middle, and end. What journey am I taking you on? What is the transformation that I want you to go through so that you're starting here, but then one day you have this training and you are transformed. And by the time you leave, this will be different for you. That is a story that I'm walking you through. And also the 3rd level, that you are not coming in as a blank slate, that we are surrounded by ambient narratives that I need to know about so that I can understand them, combat the ones that might need to change, and ride as tailwinds the ones that are aligned with where I think we need to be going, which pulls us back to context under content that I didn't really talk that much about, but it's that thing of like the same story, the same content is different in a different environment. Context is not just the individuals in the room, but what is the culture that I'm in, what already exists in the environment. I have to know not just my content, but what are the expectations? What are the things pushing against? Is the training that I'm doing really addressing a need, right? If I can do the best training in the world, but if it's not going to be reinforced out there, if it's not actually a training issue, then I'm not going to get anywhere. Listening with empathy. Everyone knows, everyone will pay lip service to how important listening is. But listening, not everyone really understands how difficult listening is. People think, oh yeah, listening's really important. All I have to do is pay attention and remember to listen. Listening is actually a really, really difficult skill and set of skills, mindsets, and muscles that we can exercise. And part of it is realizing how difficult it is. I'm glad that you're finding this helpful, Jesse. Thank you for letting me know. So when we teach listening, and sometimes we have full day courses just on listening, we could do year-long courses on listening. we spend a good portion of that time really diving into how difficult listening is and starting to recognize how hard it is to listen and all the reasons that it's hard to listen. Because until we recognize all the things that can get in our way, we can't really get better at it. And then we exercise all sorts of things to listen for, because it's not just listening for information, it's listening for values, it's listening for emotion, it's listening for intention. And then clarifying and confirming our understanding, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, because if we're really listening, then we're risking being changed. So that's listening with empathy. We have to manage focus and purpose. That's about keeping on track, really, which is one of a sort of fundamental trainer and facilitation skills. It's one of the things that I think traditionally facilitators know is their job. Sometimes we can over-rotate on the keeping on track one. So it's matched with adapting for impact. Another superpower of the Tyagi school of facilitating is how can you be in the moment and really see what's needed in the moment and flex. These two go together. Those of us who come from the world of improvisational theater and were trained very young as Tyagi sometimes need to exercise our keeping on track muscle. Maybe it's good to have an agenda and know what your timing is. I've had to sometimes work to exercise those muscles for a lot of us, working the adapting for impact and knowing when do I have to surf and sort of let the timing go and really be present with what's happening in the room. The next process contribution is balancing risk and safety. For a long time in this framework, this contribution read something about creating safe space, something in that world. And then we realized that's not quite it. It's not just about creating psychological safety or safe space. Psychological safety really is about both being able to balance safety with the right kind of risk. Where do we push people? When are we able to have the courage, both for ourselves and for others, to go into those risky places? Sometimes when we think we're making it safe for our participants, we're really just protecting it and making ourselves comfortable. So how do we do that? And balancing risk and safety is about not only being willing to be courageous, but recognizing what is safe and what is risky, because what's risky and safe for me is not necessarily what's risky and safe for you. So being able to recognize that risk and safety are different for different folks and be able to diagnose and calibrate what is the right, what's the sweet spot for any given person in any given moment. And finally, supporting development, which is really in a first draft, this is about giving feedback, but of course, feedback is not the only way to support development. Feedback, coaching, advising, there are lots of different kinds of interventions that go there. In our work here, we have a feedback framework, we have a coaching framework, and then there's just teaching. So that's the framework. We'll take it down, and it's in your packets that I've uploaded. What's your initial hit? What thoughts, insights, questions, to quote Tyagi, sarcastic remarks have you got?
As to my comment, Ted, I absolutely adore what I just saw there, and I'm looking to be utilizing it to influence my organization moving forward. Although I sometimes find, and throughout my career, and especially being a bit of a Tyagi disciple myself, that the organization is looking for standardization and standard slide templates, and we want to make sure all the participants have the same experience going through your training. So that adaptability, the empathetic listening, and being able to react, they're trying to almost eliminate. Any advice or thoughts on how to influence at that scene? It's a big question, I know, but the C-suite's thinking one thing, and then us facilitators may have a different thing in mind, especially with that L&D lens. Thoughts there?
Yeah, a few. And then I'd love to hear, from the room as well. I'm sure your colleagues have thoughts. One is, we've done this, we've used this framework with organizations like PwC and Meta, and we've customized it for them. So one of the things you can do with this framework is, for example, model values. You can identify what are our values and beliefs and identify them there, right? You can get really specific about what's our context. And really dig into what is safety for us, what's risky for us, right? There's lots of room in the framework to say, this is what our culture demands, this is what it looks like for us. So part of what's nice about the framework is to seed conversations and start to understand what is our culture and what do we like, sort of what is useful for us in terms of moving forward. That's one thought. The other is, I think that I just personally am really attracted to polarities and to those tensions. And one of the things that I find myself doing when I'm playing with this framework is examining or playing with those tensions. So some of the tensions are inherent in the framework, right? Like balance, risk, and safety is itself a tension. Some of them are between different contributions: adapt for impact, manage, focus, and purpose. If I'm balancing those, or even between different ones, like, what do I have to do now? Should I be managing myself, or should I be listening with empathy? Like, or both of those, or how do I manage myself so I can listen with empathy? Should I be listening with empathy? Should I be engaging through story? There's a way that it's not prescriptive, but it is focusing. And as I'm listening to myself talk, I think where I'm trying to go is, there isn't anything inherent in this framework that is anti-structure or anti-planning. So if you have an organization that likes preparation and structure and wants consistency, then you can do that in an informed way. Say, let's be really clear about what our outcomes are. What is it we want people to be able to do when they leave this training? What is the behavioral performance outcome we want? And then we're going to really work on managing focus and purpose so we can get them to that. And that's what your C-suite folks should care about. They shouldn't actually care about what's happening in the room or what the script is. They should care about the measurable behavioral outcome, right? I know that was a lot of words. Did it resonate at all? What do you all think about if I were really facilitating in alignment with my values? I would have answered the question this way. What do you all think?
I don't want to hijack the session, so I'd love to hear from other people.
Other thoughts or questions about the framework? Yeah.
I was also reflecting upon it in two ways, basically. On one hand, I love and try to use the Tyagi style as much as I can, thinking about reflection moments, lots of reflection moments. Sometimes, let's say, often the client asks for practical advice, tips and tricks. Tell me what to do, tell me what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always some tension there for me.
Yes.
On the other hand, I often collaborate with other facilitators, and sometimes I design the session, sometimes the other person designs the session, but we both give them at other moments within the year. And you see such a huge difference in style. And it's again attention on how to adapt. There is an architecture on paper, basically. We should deliver it exactly the same way because that's what the client wants. Yeah. To be honest, between you and I always mix it a little bit up and I make it my own because I have to feel it, it needs to be Sophie. And that's a challenge as well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It can't be off the shelf, doesn't work, just doesn't work.
I agree with you. And I agree with you. And
Mhm.
I did a program about a year into the pandemic. I've been working for Facebook, there's still Facebook at the time, for a number of years. I designed and developed an entire management curriculum, frontline manager training for them over a period of years. And I wasn't facilitating it. I designed it, they had internal people facilitating it. Then they got big enough that they started to have external people facilitating it. And they certified me, I had to go through certification from their internal people to facilitate the program that I designed, that I wasn't allowed to facilitate when I originally designed it because I wasn't internal and that was their value, right? So you see how these things change. So I was certified to teach it. And then it got taken over by some other folks and they made some choices. So I was recertified to teach it. They made some changes. And then COVID happened and they redesigned it. This was a 4.5-day program in person. They redesigned it as a 4.5-hour virtual program on WebEx. And at the beginning of the pandemic, WebEx didn't even have, people weren't even on camera. So it was me speaking to them. They weren't even going into breakout groups. I couldn't see them. It was just a chat and me speaking to them. The facilitator guide was scripted in 30-second increments, me speaking to a slide deck. So that is about as scripted as you can get. And I still made it my own. I still asked them questions. I still was interactive with them. I still said, what do you think? I still think there was a way in which our values that I'm hearing in this room, that I think a lot of us share, were somehow able to get there, even in 30-second increments. So I think that what I'm hearing you say, Sophie, is that, yeah, we have this sort of, in some ways, maybe we over-rotate a little bit on saying, oh, it has to be this way. We can get as dogmatic about, oh, it has to be this way in our world, I think, as other people can get dogmatic about their style in this world. Ultimately, what are our values, right? What do we really care about? We really care about learners being engaged. Why? So that they'll pay attention, so they'll remember, so they'll try things, so that they'll do, right? Rather than just think, right? So they'll try things on, so they take risks, so that they'll feel comfortable, like all of those reasons. And another thing that's changed about the framework as we've worked on it is the model values and behaviors. It used to say demonstrate behaviors, and those behaviors were articulated. They were things like learning happens inside the learner, which is a way of saying, we had some colleagues that we collaborated on this model with originally, and these were theirs. And it was something like, you can't force someone to learn, don't start arguing with them. If they're resistant, that's their fault. It was sort of the way they said it. Or I'm learning too as a facilitator. I don't have to know all the answers, things like that. And then we realized there are 20 other things that we know, but also other people might not have the same values as ours. So there's a way in which this framework is actually agnostic. We have clients who their values aren't actually our values, but as long as they're aligned, as long as what they're saying and what they're doing are aligned, okay. Like one of them is intensity is is imperative in order to succeed and win, is a value of theirs, right? That's not my value, but it's inherent in their culture. So how does that mean you show up? What do you expect? How are you going to demonstrate that? Ken, I see your question, and here's what I would say about research. We are not academicians. We have not run this framework through any kind of research to say, like, these are the necessary and sufficient pieces in any of that way. And if there is someone out there who wants to help us do that, that's great. What I would say is any of the specific claims that we make underneath any of these pieces, and each one of these could be a book. Each one of these is a book, right? There are books and books of research and skill-based things and, you know, advice under each one of these topics. There's robust research under the topics that we talk about and the things we offer under each one of these topics. But the framework itself and what we've put together there is just sort of our take on what we think we've seen and is important. And we are very open to what's missing or what's duplicative, and we've been tweaking it as we go, and probably will continue to do that. Yes, and Amy Edmondson definitely has stuff on psychological safety, and there are other people, you know, there are many facilitation competency models. One of the things that makes this a little bit different than some of those is our broadening of the topic of facilitation. So we're not just talking about professional facilitators in a professional facilitator context. One of the things that happens with that is that you have this sort of war between trainers and facilitators. People say, oh, I'm a facilitator, I'm not a trainer. And we will talk about, when we talk about facilitation excellence, the different activities that you can do if you're a trainer in a room, if you're facilitating a training. For example, you could be presenting, you could be teaching, or you could be sort of, the last word really is facilitating, sort of guiding is the word that we've been using, so we don't use facilitating twice. So as a facilitator, the activities you're doing are presenting, like, which could be just entertaining, teaching, actually teaching something, or guiding the conversation. And those are all different activities that a facilitator might do. Here's what we would like to do. We don't have that much time to do it. We have a self-assessment for you to think about these competencies or these contributions, as we call them, and just, again, unscientific assessment, just for you to think about which of these do I feel especially strong in, and which might I want to spend more time diving into and learning. So we've put that into the chat. You can download that. It's an editable PDF. Just take a little bit deeper dive into the behaviors that we identify under each one of these contributions. Take a minute to fill that out. We're going to give you a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes here silently by yourself to look this over, and then some time in some small groups again to have a conversation about this.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Because when I look at the framework, it actually does not, it's like the same approach, whether it's face-to-face or virtual. It does not change, but we've also received a lot of, you know, comments, feedback from the trainers that it's still face-to-face.
Oh, you just got on mute.
Sorry, it's a challenge for me indeed. Okay, no, I was saying that, but we get a lot of feedback from the trainers, whether internal or external, but from external trainers, saying that it's still better to do face-to-face compared to virtual, right?
In person versus
in
virtual.
your experience, yeah, in your experience, anchoring on this framework,
yeah,
what is exactly done differently or need to be done differently if it's a virtual session, whether it's a meeting or a training?
Yeah, it feels to us like learning a second language. If you're used to being in person and then you have to go to a virtual environment, it's a little bit like that, like doing your work in not your native tongue. So it's not that the principles are different, but how you have to do and say things may change. right? So if I need to get people, if I want people to actively, if I want to hear from my participants and have it be interactive and not me just spraying information at them, then I need to figure out, oh, how am I going to do that? How am I going to have participants talk to each other? How am I going to have them engage with each other? How am I going to get the group to feel like a group? And I need to understand my tools, and how do I use breakout sessions? How do I have people take turns? How do I get every voice in the room? For example, right now, some people are on the screen and I can see their faces, some people aren't. How am I going to listen and check in and see if I'm reaching people, or if they are engaged or paying attention, if I can't see their faces, right? So there are things that I can do in the room that are different from how I do online. Some of them are better virtually or easier virtually. For example, I have chat, so I can have a sort of side conversation. There are people who might never have said anything in person who now are engaged and speaking up because of chat. So it's not a better or worse, but it's like the dialect is different.
All right.
Yeah, I feel like there was one other thing I was going to say about that. How does that land, Claudine?
Yeah, it actually makes sense. I like when you said that it's not, it's not better or worse, especially the highlight on chat. But maybe in the succeeding sessions, what I would be also more keen about learning is how do we make our trainers, for the trainer session, for example, how do we equip the trainers that have been very used to doing face-to-face and now that they have, now being forced to do virtual, right?
Yes.
How could we enable them to also perform? Yeah.
So that's what you'd want to do. You'd want to do an explicit session on facilitating in virtual space. And some of those things might be establishing presence in virtual space. We spent a year being asked to do that session. How do you establish presence and rapport and build rapport in virtual space? Because that's the main thing that's different for most people. Is how do I feel connected and establish presence here? The principles aren't different, but the specifics are very different, right? And also for trainers, how do I use my tools? How do I get to know and use my tools? How do I deal with breakout rooms? What do I do with my slides, right? One of the big differences is in in-person space, I can have my slides up and it's a very different relationship to me. Whereas in virtual space, the minute I put a slide up, I become tiny. I can't see the participants. I mean, I can set it up in different ways, but like in Zoom, I have to know that there's a way I can set up my screen so I can see the participants and my slide. Otherwise, the default will make you all small and go away, right? There's tips like that, right? How do I use breakout rooms? There's lots of technical things. How do I use chat? How do I, how often am I going by myself versus having a compatriot who can produce for me? Like there are lots of little, like knowing the language that can help. So that's a session of its own that has nothing to do with the content.
Thanks, guys.
Sure. All right. So, and I think, Jesse, your question is connected to that, right? In terms of if you don't have a facilitator, I mean, this has always been true. I mean, like e-learning has done this to begin with, right? It was sort of ahead of the curve. It was already saying, how do I use the architecture of the space to build that in by default, right? Okay, so spend 3 minutes or so looking at the self-assessment. Then we're going to put you into some rooms for 5 minutes and just check on which of these feel like they have special opportunities for you to expand your range of options, and then we'll come back and close. All right, so what did we discover in that brief, not enough time conversation? You can come off mute or type in chat. Is there a specific contribution that you feel like you'd like to work on or know more about? Or something that you feel like you have a superpower, Kamsi?
Yes, you should tell your suggestions to me. I think you should explain. You will. I'm sure that you will do it more than me. Better.
You're asking me?
No, just
No. Oh yeah, one of the people in your group. Yeah, yeah.
he gave a super fantastic suggestion to us. That I'm sure that he will
Jesse.
share with us now also. Yeah, Jesse, sorry.
Well, they're just happy because we did some pole dancing in our group.
Oh, nice.
No, well, it actually ties into what just happened there, Kat. So after playing from the breakout room, we have this instance where people all have something to share. There were some brilliant ideas, and then there's this hesitation who wants to step up, and we kind of began discussing the comfort in the room. And you, as the facilitator, could have just called on something. Sophie, tell me what you're thinking.
I could have.
You could have definitely done that, but then you're challenging that comfort because maybe she's not as comfortable speaking out or more introverted. And so the play when we're facilitating and pushing people out of comfort zones versus, keeping people comfortable and trying to walk that fine line or tightrope as we move forward through it. And then what I shared was I have one activity sometimes I use with a group I call pole dancing, and I usually start the session with it, both virtually. I've done it virtually and in person, but it's spelled P-O-L-L. And so what I do is poll the room, and I'll say, we're going to start off with some pole dancing just to see some people, a little bit of shock and awe, grab some attention. Stand up and dance if you're attending an LDA conference. And then I usually do a little visual saying, this is what you can do if you're more introverted. Anyways, I've used it. I usually do 3 or 4 things, but it gets people smiling a little bit more relaxed. And I let people know I'm going to be trying to challenge you so we're all here for the same purpose, and that's to learn and grow. But anyways.
Fantastic, Jesse. So many wonderful things in there. One is you're getting everyone involved right at the top, right? Also, you're breaking expectations that this is going to be normal, right? We're dancing. It's a little bit edgy, right? We're going to call it pole dancing, right? And you're getting everybody involved. There's evidence that if you get people speaking within the first however many minutes, they're much more likely to speak the rest of the time. Beautiful. And you're pointing to, I mean, the contribution when you say, like, I can call on people, or I can just leave some space, or even just leaving silence, right? All of those things are you're talking about the balancing risk and safety space. Yeah. I have stories in my head with this group versus other groups about it being a safer space, but those stories I am making those up because of how I feel in the space. And I know some of you, but for some of you, it may be your first time here, right? I did not spend a lot of time in this session getting to know you, setting ground rules. We've got an hour. It's part of this larger conference. Like, there's a lot of reasons that I started this session differently than I might have started a day of training or a new session with a client. And some of those choices are good. Some of those choices may be bad, but these are exactly the questions to be asking. Thank you for that beautiful activity. Any other thoughts about a specific contribution that you're like, ooh, this is one I'm going to want to work on or want to know more about? Ken, I see you off mute.
Oh yeah, actually, I guess it was more like a question we were sort of deliberating within the group, sort of understanding where interactivity and driving interaction in a session, or as part of facilitating a session, comes in under this framework, and also sort of understanding where the line or overlap between facilitation design and actual facilitation. Be interesting to get just because we're just having a conversation around that in our own group.
Yeah, what did you come up with in your group?
Claudine, do you want to go?
Oh, Always having problems with the muting voice. No, because I think it should be carried because on my part, I don't even do facilitation because my role is more about the mediate the I'm basically representing the business, identifying the needs and also gathering feedback on how the facilitation went and so forth. So what I was sharing with Carrie and Ken, and I see that the list that you've just done be something business side also to put structure on how do we really want to evaluate the facilitators.
Yes. That's the question. How do you want to evaluate your facilitators is an excellent question. So yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, yeah, I was going to add that I think that this framework potentially raised questions for this group about, are there things about the framework we want to integrate into the way we evaluate facilitators? So do you want to think about these different contributions in the way we ask our questions and maybe some of the smile sheets or things we offer up afterwards and as a way to sort of collect or categorize some of that feedback. I will say personally, I offered that sort of the adaptation piece is probably the one I want to work on or think about the most, just because we were talking about this, but frequently we're designing, developing, like we're doing all of the things soup to nuts. So by the time we're actually up in front of the room, we're pretty attached to our creation. And you don't want to give up that activity because it's really important and you won't get like the final aha if you don't do this thing, but also this group is in a different place. And so managing those things is always tricky.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, so beautifully put, right? The more involved we are in the design, the more devoted we are to the design, the more the more care we put in, the harder it is to, yeah, it's a dilemma. And I'll tell you, again, sort of having been trained by Tyagi in my youth, even though I went to grad school and took, all the 40 hours of design for 1 hour of delivery stuff, I've had to learn to pull back the other way. Sometimes it's really good to not change your design, to not get distracted in the moment by whatever's happening, but to go nope, I have to stay on track because I know there was a reason I did it this way. And sometimes I'll change it and then I'll take that little peg out and then the wheels fall off. I'm like, oh, right, there was a reason we put that there. It was a good reason. So it is a polarity to serve. And there's almost never one right answer, but they're really good questions to have in mind, right? These are the right questions to ask. I will tell you that the framework and with these behaviors has been used as it stands as a facilitator assessment tool. So Facebook had us come in and use it as an observation sheet for all of their external facilitators and then give feedback using it. So we presented the framework and then observed facilitators and gave them feedback based on it. And really in this way, it was use this rarely, missed opportunities, used it consistently, exceptional, or could teach it sort of assessment. And yeah. Use that way, definitely.
Can I have a question? Can I just ask? And maybe not to you and to the rest of the facilitators in this group. Because right now we normally hire an external party to run our trainings. But we also come from a logistics company where things are quite complex. And one of the common feedback that we're getting currently from our participants is that the facilitator is struggling to relate to what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And hence they couldn't expand the conversation anymore. So I'm just wondering if it's too much to ask from a facilitator from our side, to a facilitator to learn about our business, to contextualize the examples or ask the right question, or how what exactly is a realistic expectations in terms of being a subject matter expert
Yep.
for an industry like ours, a complex one.
Claudine, so I am right now just 4 months into the working in the world of forestry, and we bring in a lot of external vendors too. And I know very little. I'm still in the learning process about forestry in general. We have a whole logistics department. We have several technical apps that, again, I'm not familiar with. But what Wes or my organization's done is hired me specifically to help bridge that gap. So I partner with our SME and an external vendor, and I help marry those two things. So try and say, how are we going to engage our learners, understand our culture, what it is that they're doing, and then work with the facilitator to say, these are the points, these are the values we need to hit home. I want to set you up for success as well. And while you are an external vendor, while you're facilitating this, you are now part of our organization. So let me help you be set up for success so it's best for everybody involved. So that's literally what I'll be spending this afternoon doing as well, is being that bridge. So that's just the way we've approached it. I'd love to hear other innovative solutions as well.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like Carrie is recommending a similar thing, that you pair, what beforehand and during, you can pair internal expertise with facilitation skills. So if you have a trainer or facilitator who has those skills, you can also have SMEs come in and hold that expertise, whether they come in and present or whether you have videos, right? And the more your facilitators do the courses, the more they learn. You can also have them learn your business as much as you want. They can observe things, they can come have interviews, you can give them videos as much as you want. Facebook for years had their internal people do it because they said, you don't know our culture well enough and it's the most important thing. And then after we had designed the program with them and observed, we sort of were deemed culturally fit enough to do it ourselves. So yes, if you have a longer collaboration, you can do it. Exactly, Sophie. So in our last minute, I will tell you that we will be doing a deeper dive, 1 hour is hardly deep, but a deeper dive into the following 3 contributions, mostly just because they're some of our favorites, which are establishing presence, especially talking about status and power dynamics, not just about taking presence, but also about giving and taking focus and ownership in the room, engaging through story, and adapting for impact. Yay, Carrie's favorite. Those are on the schedule, and I think they're on various Mondays. I think we skip one maybe, but so I think it's next Monday, and then 2 weeks after that, and then 3 weeks after, and then the next week after that. So we hope we'll see you around for that. If there are others that you're interested in, you have information in your sheets, and of course, we're happy to connect with you offline. We hope you'll see you around. Good luck to all of you. Thank you for being here, and fly, be free. Have a good day. Next session on October 31st. So you can
Do
come.
we have to wear costumes?
Yes, I was just going to say you can come in costume if you like. If Halloween is a thing where you are.